Good morning, YouTube. It's been a while. This is Dan at the House of Broken Dobbs Things, and well, you've all lived through the same year I have, year and a half. So, been kind of idle, but today I scrounged up the camera, scrounged up the fresh set of batteries, and we're going to go ahead and shoot some video. The candidate for today is a 2000 model Volvo S70. Very clean little Florida car. My son-in-law drives it, and it's got a few issues. So from that standpoint, we're going to take a look at today ball joints. We're going to take a look at intercontrol arms, and we're going to just take a look around the car itself. So this is a non-turbo car, normally aspirated. It is a good, clean little soldier, and actually best part is I don't have a lot invested in it, so it owes me nothing, but we're going to try to do our best to give it some new life and put it back into top-notch service. Alright, so hang in there, we'll get started. Thanks. Okay, so as I mentioned before, the jack's out from it now. It's fully supported by the jack stand. Now, why did I pick this particular spot? One, it's on the subframe, so it's a heavily support. Two, I'm going to be going after the control arm, which is right here, and then the other element's right behind there. I didn't want to put the jack stand right in the middle of the way. Additionally, we're also going to take a look at the inner tie rod ends, and we're probably going to have to change that. So we're going to keep that as far out of the way. Now, this is very solid. If you see any space under your jack stand on any corner, take a hammer and tap it. Let it get into position, but leave the jack under it while you situate that. And once it's solid, it's not going anywhere. And just as a word to the wise of a person who's made all those mistakes, and I don't share them to be lecturing, I share them because I've done it wrong. So from that one, we're going to take a look at the control arm today. During a front end suspension inspection, we found that it had a little bit of wear. Now, when I say ball joint, the pivot point for the entire front suspension is here. You'll see it right back in there. And that pivots at the bottom, and at the top of the strut there's a rotating bearing assembly which actually allows the front wheel to pivot in and out. So those are the two main points. The strut at the top obviously can make noise and do all kinds of things. Coming apart, not likely. Ball joints, extremely dangerous. You need to keep an eye on them, and you certainly don't want them coming loose. You probably have seen that alongside the highway where the front wheel is just all jacked out of the position. That either is a ball joint or a connecting rod has let loose, and it's not a good thing. So this is something that's fairly easy and inexpensive to resolve. Doesn't require a lot of heavy equipment or high skill set. So we're going to go through that example today. And one of the things you'll notice right here for you Volvo folks, the scuff pad that's right here, it let's see here, it doesn't appear to be there. What do you mean by scuff pad? Well, you probably have heard this on your Volvo one time or the other, where you go to full steering lock. There's supposed to be a pad here, nylon, plastic, whatever it is, and it provides a wear surface because right here is the steering stop. When you turn, it actually rubs against this. So when this gets popped off, it's not held on very securely. This is not a great design, but it is what it is. This will actually scuff and just make a horrible noise when you're at full steering lock. It means your steering wheel is all the way to one side or the other. It will just make a horrible, horrible noise. And it's easily resolved. You can buy those individually. It's more common on the Volvo S series. This is a 70, but the S60, S80, those kind of things. But they typically come with a brand new control arm, which I have in hand. So just to know, in case you have it, it's not going to hurt anything. Eventually it'll wear, but just don't be terrified if you see it. Take a look, and if it's gone, then you know what's causing the noise. And actually, this one, the other side is gone too. See it over there, same position. It's gone as well. So from that, we're going to continue to get busy here today. The inner tie rod has a little bit of wiggle to it, so we'll take a look at that. And subject of another video, we'll talk about this. Hey, wait a minute. Where's your oil pan? Yeah, well, we got another topic to cover. It's getting the end of the year, it's getting colder, so I'm having to pick up my pace on getting things resolved. And I thought, why not? I haven't filmed in a long time. We'll just go ahead and get a video going and pay back some of the folks who've helped me so much. Specifically, really helpful is Robert DIY. Robert, you do a great job. Thank you. We'll rely on you for a lot of the P80 car stuff, and thank you for taking the time. So I thought I'd try to pay it forward and do just a little one on this little S70. All right, we'll bring you back. All right, we removed the front wheel, and this is how it sits. A couple of key points to bring out for you Volvo new folks. I was one once, not long ago. But from this one, obviously here's the wheels off, here's your brake rotor. It's kind of got the typical surface rust. It hasn't been driven all that much. But from there, brake caliper, here's your strut, and over here, the outer tie rod, which is the bent piece, and then there's a short stub one going inside, which is your inner tie rod end. Around on this side, you'll hear these things used. Your CV shaft, which is what drives the wheel, the inner CV boot, the outer CV boot tucked in here, and down below here we get into that ball joint thing. Bring some light over. That'll help that. There we go. Should help you see into that space. We're going to be taking a look at that ball joint. There we go. Okay, so from that one, the ball joint coming in here, right down here, there's a pinch bolt. We'll be taking a look at that. The rest of this, the control arm, if you will, see this one right here, this is the leading edge of the control arm. And in the back, the other large bolt right here is the back of the lower control arm. The ball joint on this particular model is made into the lower control arm. That's different than the S60, S80. Those actually have removable ball joint, which I think is a pretty neat idea. It's a little bit of a problem to put in, but not a big deal. Now this, we'll be taking this control arm off, removing those two bolts, removing a pinch bolt on the ball joint, and go from there. But first I want to try to show you why we're going to all this. It's cold. It's 50, 55 here in Michigan. And I'm trying to beat the weather and trying to take care of my kids, and yeah, well, it just never ends. Okay, let me bring you back from the shop. Well, I futzed around trying to give it some space there. I put the jack under it for somewhat of an important reason. If you think of it, the ball joint is a ball. It sits in a pocket, basically like a joint on your body, right? There's a pocket, and then there's the rotating element, knee joint, shoulder, wrist, all that stuff has a pivot point. So if you allow the wheel to go all the way down, the angle on that ball to the socket it rides in isn't the same one that you drive in, because this goes up. Basically the wheel goes up whenever you are driving, up and down, up and down. When you're having the wheel off and suspension is fully allowed to dangle, it's not the same angle anymore. You're in the unworn spot. So the worn spot is where it's going to be in the normal. So I raised this up to kind of put it at ride height. In other words, this is about where it would be. I used the jack to lift up the lower control arm to put those two joints together again. And it's going to be hard to see. It's more easily felt. But inside of here, that joint is loose. And it's hard to see on video. Okay, now let's talk about that inner tie rod thing that we were looking at. The inner tie rod is right. Nice. Camera optics. Boy, I gotta get the new film crew. Okay, so the bellow you see. Let's use a pointing instrument. Okay, there's the bellow. You see the green bar? Inside there's a ball socket, which is your inner tie rod end. And coming out here to the outside, this is your outer tie rod. And it connects to the wheel. It causes the pivot for the left and right control of the wheel. Well, you want that to be fairly tight and controlled. Well, in this one, I've got the wheel on, and I'm going to, hopefully you can see it. Okay. The other wheel is on the ground. I shouldn't have any slack between the left wheel and the right wheel in that control. You can see that. Maybe you can even hear it. See that movement? Yeah, that's not good. This one's really just kind of loose. It's going to go over chuck holes and things like that. So while we're here, we might as well go ahead and take care of it. Now the outer one doesn't seem to be too bad, but you know what? If we're going to do this, let's do it right. Once and done, right? Okay, I'm going to bring you around and show you the next step. Okay, we're back under the front of the vehicle, and before we get too far into this job, I want to go ahead and make a measurement. And the measurement is for basically the front toe. Now the vehicle was recently aligned where we found out that there was some clunking issues and so forth. I didn't look, I was lazy, okay? Normally I would have done it, but I didn't. So they put it on the rack and they set the toe, and it's and we basically call it set the toe and let it go. So if you see on this side, I've got a tape measure, and I've got a mark right here, and I've made another mark on the opposite side. There we go. Why this is important? There are 1,000 ways you can get a measurement, and none of them are going to be right. All right, so I've got a mark. Now that's going to be my point of reference for before and after. I'm going to do one side at a time, and I'm going to bring it back exactly with the adjustment on the tie rod to exactly the same measurement, and then it should get me at least in the ballpark. Normally you take them apart, you count the turns, and you do all kinds of stuff, but manufacturing tolerances and everything else being equal, it's kind of like, you know, hand grenade level. So because this was aligned, I know it's got some slop in it, but at least I'm going to get it in the ballpark, and then I'll get it aligned right after. Okay, so straight old tape measure, I'm going to put it on the other line exactly as much as I can, and I'm going to come right here, and then I'm going to take a measurement. You can see the line. I'm going to measure it right there, and then I'm going to write it down because I am old, and it appears that looks like 54 1/4 and one additional line. All right, 54 1/4 and one additional line. Now that means nothing to most folks. Let's see, is that 16ths? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yep, that should be 54 5/16. All right, so I'm going to write that down, 54 5/16, which, take one more measurement again. Let's see if I can repeat. Hook it on the other side. All right, same spot. 54 5/16. All right, I'm going to write that on the inside of the tire. Okay. Won't hurt anybody, and it's right there for me to be staring at. So when I take the tire off and I put it back on, I need to put it in the same spot. That's not a big problem. But we'll get this tire off and get busy. Okay, we're going to come in and we're going to take a different approach today. We're going to try to not borrow trouble. Well, what do you mean by that? Well, I can take the caliper off. I can take the rotor off. That's fine. That's additional work. That's stuff connected, disconnected. That's fine. But can I do this without removing all of that? Will it work just as easily? I don't know. So we're going to come in after the pinch bolt on the ball joint. It goes through the ball joint. There's a groove cut into the ball joint. I'll show you later. And that's what retains it. So it's extremely good joint. Pretty much foolproof. And then we're also going to take off this outer tie rod right here. This nut right here. Now there's a flat on here. Most of the time the tie rod goes into a tapered joint. For those of you from the machinist side of the world, I do a little dab of that as an unprofessional paid intern. So from that, hopefully it will have a tight enough connection to the taper where it won't break loose when I break the nut loose. That won't always happen. If not, then we're going to have to circle back in here and start taking it the hard way. So anyway, those are a couple of things there. I'm going to go ahead and lube some of these bolts up. They don't look terribly awful. One of the things that I use as a rust penetrant, I know I can pay for a lot more, but I do like 50-50 mix of acetone and used and or new transmission fluid. So whatever you got left in the jug, put it in there. It works very well. It is dirt cheap, and after all, on this channel, we're all about saving money. So from that standpoint, otherwise we wouldn't be out here today in the cold changing our own parts, doing our own work. So from that, we'll bring you right back. Okay, I'm going to take the tie rod end off first, show you a little trick in case you've never seen it before. Again, as I hope, this is an 18 millimeter. However, I'll caution you, if it's had tie rods replaced before, the nut size may be different depending on the manufacturer of it. But we're going to go ahead and zap this off, and then I'll show you a quick trick. Okay, great. The taper held. In other words, this didn't turn. This is in a ball socket. It should turn. However, the press fit of this nut going in before and the taper going into this spindle arm right here was sufficient to hold it in place. The torque it took to break it loose wasn't greater than the actual ability for it to hold it. Okay, so I'm going to put this nut back on just a couple of threads. Okay, now the angle of this arm is going this direction, and this is an old trick. You may have seen it before. It may look a little brutal, but it works great. So typically nobody will get hurt. So I'm going to come back a little bit. Hopefully you can see that. And I'm going to strike the hammer, just a standard ball peen hammer. The boot's gone on that tie rod end, by the way. Right there, that boot's chewed up, so it's on its way out because road grit, salt, and everything in Michigan will eat it alive. So I'm going to bring the hammer right this direction. I'm going to give it a good smack. I put the nut on to protect the threads. Not that we're going to reuse this tie rod, but just out of, you know, some of the stuff you get used to just practice. So I'm going to give it a couple of smacks. There we go. Hopefully you saw that one. All right, broke that one loose. Now, had we been reusing the tie rod, which is very common, the nut would have protected these threads from my hammer blows, because after all, I'm me. Okay. Okay, you can see that joint, and that boot is way gone, so it was time. Rubber eventually gives up all of the stuff that makes it rubber. Eventually it evaporates. Now, this is why I did the wheel on first. If you were feeling it now and trying to recreate that, what we did before, you can feel a little, but not much at all. So it's best to give yourself the most leverage when you're taking this thing apart and to see what you can get from there. Okay? So that tie rod's loose. Why did I do that first? Hey, look at that. I can get the stuff now without actually having to work around it, because the tie rod held the wheel in place. Now I can flip this back and forth, whatever I need to do, get stuff in and out of my way. Okay? I will get this ball joint loose. Let's take a size check here. Okay, that's a 14 millimeter on this side. Again, it doesn't seem to matter in the aftermarket. They could be a 15, it could be a 13, whatever. But there's that one. And it's probably going to be a 13 on the front, I'm going to guess. Okay. Well, it's a 14 on the front too. Okay, so in this one it's 14 on both sides. So I'm going to blast that out of there, and I will bring you back. It's not going to be good TV because I'm going to be in your way. Bring you right back. Okay, I've got the nut off here, and I'm going to follow that up and drive that through with a brass punch. Why a brass punch? Well, you try to protect the threads, for one, which, well, you shouldn't be reusing the bolt either. Well, yes, but stuff happens. Sometimes you gotta go and you've got an order into IPD or Rock Auto, whoever. I'm not a paid advertiser for anybody. and you just need to get by for a couple of days. So I don't recommend changing that and doing it like that. However, sometimes stuff happens. Okay, I'll bring you right back after I knock this out. Okay, next phase. Lower pinch bolts out. I've lubed it with the acetone and trans fluid, letting it soak while I'm working on these other ones. So now I'm going to the control arm pivot points. Currently right here, I'm using a impact swivel. If you don't have any, it's great. It's a 17 millimeter and an 18 millimeter. I think the odds are pretty good that's going to be accurate. So impact swivels, there's two types. There's a ball type, which is this one, and there's a square type, which is like a U-joint, like two squares. Get this one. Spend the money. Do not. Yeah, the other ones are great in an absolute emergency at your grandma's house or something. But if you're going to do any real work, this is what you want. Okay, this is 1/2 inch drive, and we are going to see what happens. Okay, that was glorious. It can be a lot longer, a lot harder messing with it manually. So that was actually quite good. Now we'll work on getting the other one now. I'll bring you right back. It's going to be a little tighter shot, so I can't get in there with the camera. Okay, two inner joints or two inner control arm bolts are gone. They came out wonderfully. Don't reuse them. I think that's a Volvo directive. Now we're going to get this ball joint out of here. Remember, I soaked it before, otherwise it can be a long day because it's got a little bit of room to move around side to side once that pinch bolt's out, so it can get cocked and so forth. But don't be afraid to I'm coming in here with just a small pry bar. If it needs to get more aggressive, we can do that too, but we're going to you see it's coming down. The control arm came loose. That's all right too. You just want to be careful of the CV boot. You want to watch out for that. Alright, and you also don't want to let the axle just come swinging out, because that can be a not great time either. Okay, I'm going to come in. Got that out. That one's coming out. Okay, so we're going to just work at getting that down now. It's broken loose. It's just gonna have to come out. So let me come back with that, and we'll get that joint broken out of there. It's gonna have to be get in your way with the camera, so I'll bring you right back. Okay, on the inner tie rod, there's the boot right here. This guy right here, and you'll notice right here there is a crimped buckle. Okay, you can see it right there. That's what's holding it on. So they put the steel band around it, and they have a special pair of crimping pliers, and they grab it and they give it a good squeeze. Well, you may or may not have those. They also are very commonly used on CV joints and so forth. The good news is there is no pressure on this joint whatsoever, and there is just a need to have it to retain. I've used, and many other people have used, when you get done, just use a zip tie. It works fine. It won't come off. There's nothing in there to come apart. There's no leakage or anything that you're going to cause. So just as an alternative, that's what you can do. But in order to get in there and get this boot off, you have to get that the crimp off. So this one was turned in absolutely 100% the wrong direction. So I was able to push and scoot it up here where you can get to it. What I will do is take a screwdriver, and I'll go into that joint, and I will actually give it a twist, and I will open it up, and that will relieve the tension, and then we'll get the boot off. Outside here, there's another clamp which goes on to the inner tie rod, which clamps the boot on the outside. So we've already taken that apart with a pair of needle nose pliers. That's not a problem. So okay, we'll get that off. Right back. Okay, welcome back. We were able to get our screwdriver in. Pull this off for you. And if you can see that, I was able to go in right here with the screwdriver and give it a twist, a couple of them actually, and then you break this connection right here, because these right here were locked onto these, and then when they locked, then they crimped it and pulled it tight. So, okay, got that part done. Now, the boot, when you pull it back, you can see the actual ball socket. I'll get you in there a little closer. There you go. All right, you see the ball socket? Oh, it is a ball, and it's in a socket. Exactly. Now, the green thing on the inside, that's a steering stop. It goes on behind it. So when the steering comes to the end of its travel, that's what it's going to hit. So it's important. You need it. Don't forget it. If you take it apart and leave it off accidentally, fix that. That's going to be a mess. Okay, now, as I mentioned, with the wheel off and everything unloaded, I really can't tell if this thing's worn or not. Well, let me guarantee you this. See that thing flopping around? That's not normal. Okay? They typically, when brand new, they'll feel a little stiff, and that's okay. That's the way it's meant to be. But when they're just absolutely just wobbly, free like that, it's no good. Okay, now the outer tie rod, as I mentioned, now you can see it, the boot was completely gone. So it too has a little ball socket, and it likewise is worn. And if you remember what I talked about on the ball joint, you have to kind of be at the right angle for where this thing spent most of its life. If you look at that, yeah, it's got grease in there, but it's also got other stuff in there. And, you know, cycle that several thousand times a day or whatever, it's going to come apart. So, long story short, the boots get ripped, bad things happen. If you have a grease zerk, keep grease pushed through there. Don't blow up the boot with so much grease, but when it starts to swell, you're done. That just keeps things moving freely and smoothly, and sometimes the way our ancestors who used to put grease zerks on everything, that was the right way. If you'll notice on this one, there's a grease zerk right here for this sway bar link. Okay, now recapping, we've got the ball joint out. We're getting ready to take the inner tie rod end off of the rack, and then we're going to put it all back together again. So from that standpoint, we're able to get the ball joint out without removing the caliper and the rotor and anything else, so that's good. We're able to get the tie rod end down, and then we'll have to take special steps to get it loose, and we'll talk about that here in just a minute. Okay, so we've taken off the outer tie rod. There is a 21mm jam nut right here that you need to break loose, and then this tie rod will unthread pretty easily. So, okay, so we need to take that nut off, and this one's being grumpy, so I'm just going to take a quick. Oh, and it's being grumpy. Okay, just using a crescent wrench. There's a couple of notches cut in the tie rod that are made to help turn it whenever you're making the adjustment. So from there, I'm just going to take this and get it ungrumpy. Oh, it is grumpy. Alright, well, let me get that sorted out and I'll bring you right back. Okay, hopefully you can see that I've got the tool on. It's locked in, it won't come off, and then I've turned the rack enough where I can come up right through here and I can put some counter force. So when I twist, it's going to go this way. So I'm going to twist the opposite direction to take that load off that pinion. So I'm turning this way, I'm holding that way. So you can see that pinion. If you look in there really close, you can see a little bit of movement. Okay, I want to keep that off of that steering. Again, that's just me. You probably see it done 1,000 times, never have a trouble, but you know what? I'm here. I got the tools. Let's just get it done. All right, I'm going to break that inner tie rod loose and I'll bring you back. It's going to be kind of a clumsy two-handed thing to get it done, so I'll be right back. Okay, we are currently back, and a friend of mine had asked for a little help on something, so I am bringing the lower control arms, bringing this one into alignment. It's being a little coy, we go. All right, that's one side. And I'm going to repeat for the back. Okay. There we go. All right. Both of those are started. And that one's in. That one's in. Okay, time to start the nut. Good thing here is I'm going to use a little bit of red Loctite. Oh no, red's a little too stiff. Nah, red's just fine. The blue is fine. The red is just a smidge more than that. I'll take that. Okay, just a dab. The reason I like this is half the time you take your other Loctite in the liquid form, it just drips in the driveway. So I am a fan of the lipstick version, and no, that is not lipstick. I use that as a description, okay? It is not lipstick. So don't go into the house and think it's going to do the same thing. It might work, but I doubt it. Okay, so we have those two in place. Now the next element we need to do is get the ball joint stuff back into position. Okay, if you'll notice, this ball joint is in a lot better condition than the last one. As I mentioned before, right here is the groove. That is, when it's in position, the bolt sits right in that groove. Okay, and that's what keeps everything together, which is your optimal thing. So I'm going to pull the camera out. I'm going to drop that in and go from there. We've already reinstalled the tie rod end, so we talked about before. I torqued it to 65 foot-pounds. I looked and looked and looked. I couldn't find a great specification, so I correlated with a couple of the Volvo guys, and it's like, it seemed to be the consensus. That's where it was. So put it on, torqued it into place, again using a backup wrench to not twist too much on the pinion. And then we just got this loosely threaded on here because I will go and reset it back to the original spec of what we took it apart at and go from there. So let me stuff this together and we'll get rolling. Okay, just recapping on that one. Here's a trick I just kind of figured out. Yeah, I'm on the lower control arm. I have my jack, and I said kind of somewhat parallel. How about you use it to just right at the point where the jack starts to lift off the jack stand? That is probably about ride height, because I'm over. This spring is supporting the weight of the vehicle, and it's probably in its normal way. So that would be approximately right about there. Right about there. That ought to be roughly parallel. Not a bad guess. You kind of see where the jack stand starts to shift. That's what I'm going to call ride height for the moment. Okay? Perfect? No. But it's going to be close. Alright? And that's all you're really going here. A little twist left or right's not bad, but when you moved it, a good ways, that could be a lot of rebound on the suspension, which might make it handle a little wonky. Alright? Let me tighten these up and then I'll bring you back. Okay, on this one, the tie rod, I'm putting the nut on. It was spinning because it didn't have that tight tapered joint set up yet, so it has an Allen in the center of it. It could be a Torx, it could be anything, but I'm just pulling it down and get it set in place. But if you try to tighten it and it's not ready, it's just going to sit and spin and you're just going to look silly. So just go ahead and do it right. You could take an impact, you could have buzzed it a bunch of different times and that might have been fine, but ultimately you really just do like I just told you. That'll make things a lot better for you. Okay, tie rod. Left hand side, ball joint. Here. Looks like the tie rod end. Ball joint, 50 newtons. Tie rod end steering arm nuts, 70 newtons. Okay, we can take care of that real quick. 70 newtons. That's about right, just a little bit more than we've been putting on other stuff. Now I pulled it down so it should hold this torque whenever I do it. Otherwise, you'd have to use it like a gooseneck. Okay, it's there. Okay, now okay, so we got that. Now I am not going to put this boot on yet for the tie rod, inner tie rod end. And guess what they shipped? This is what they shipped to put their boot on. So I think we'll be okay. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put the wheel on temporarily and go ahead and set that toe and then lock that down, and then we'll be pretty much done on this side. Yes, we need a brake line. Yeah, we talked about that. I could probably true up these rotors later, but as of right now, it's 2 o'clock and it's overcast in Michigan. It's in the 50s and I'm getting cold. I need to pick it up a notch. So we'll bring you back in a moment. Okay, we talked about this in the very beginning relative to the tape measure. I have a spot and I have a spot. Okay, we started off with 54 and 5/16 and now we are at 55 and 1/8. Okay, which means the wheels are further apart than they were before. So in order to get this to work, I need to thread, because it's on the back side of the wheel, this will make your head hurt, I need to thread that tie rod out. Looks like it's just going to be a little under an inch, about 3/4 of an inch. So, I mean, again, I just spitballed it and threw it in there, and that's really not too bad at all. So I will bring it back to where we were. I'm on the same line, right where we were before, and I'll bring it in and adjust it, and we'll double check it about 10 times, and then we'll be ready to set the lock nut on that and put the, I'm not going to put the boot on yet, but I'm going to set the lock nut. Okay, this is not going to be great TV, but I will let it run and then I'll edit it. Okay, so from the tie rod perspective, as I mentioned, I need to bring the wheel in. Okay, this way. In order to bring the front of the wheel in, I have to push the back of the wheel out. So from that standpoint, actually I said that backwards. I need to push the wheel in this direction to lower that distance, so I need to thread that in the back out. That will push the wheel this way and it will close up that gap. Alright. Fortunately, we have all brand new parts, so it won't take much to do this. So I am going to take the tie rod, nice little set on there, and I am going to back it out. Okay, then we're going to take a reading. I just did about 4 or 5 little quick quarter to eighth turn little cuts. So let's check it again. Okay, that moved us about 1/8 of an inch. We got a good long ways to go, which is not surprising because I just spitballed it. Well, actually, I didn't even do that. I just threw it on just to see how it goes. Crisp wrench. Alright, so from this one, I'm going to go up. No, right there. And again, we're doing this in the same position that we took it apart. It will not be perfect, folks. I'm still looking at getting the toe end set to save the brand new tires I just put on here. But just so we have it. Okay. Okay. Now let's take a quick reading. We are 54 3/4. Okay. 54 5/16. Thereabouts. We'll keep going. And again, this won't make it perfect, but it will certainly get it in the ballpark. Steering wheel may be off-centered slightly. That's where you need specialized alignment equipment to get there, but it's okay. You'll be able to drive it safely and have no real issue. Okay, that was a good amount. Let's see if we can get it knocked out over the next couple of cycles. Half of the day is getting all the tools lined up that you need. The other side, barring anything mechanical problems, it will go much quicker. Okay, that's 54 and looks like 7/16. 2, 3, yeah, it's 7/16, so we are closing in, folks. It's got to be just a little bit more. Okay. $54 and 5/8. We are within a 1/16 or so. Let's take that last little bit. Okay. That should get it pretty darn close. Again, there may be some folks who say, oh, it's horrible, it's off by a million. It'll be all right. Okay. I can live with that. That's within like a 32nd or less. So I would say that is good to go on this side. Now we're going to recreate everything for the opposite side, and hopefully I don't run out of daylight. All right, I'll bring you back. Okay. One last thing. Okay, I pulled the wheel back off again because we've set the dimension. It's done. So what we have now is the tie rod has been adjusted right where it should be, and then this is the nut. Well, this is the part of the tie rod that I was using to change the toe. So basically this doesn't turn, this does. It threads in and out. So if I thread it in, it pulls the wheel that way. If I thread it out, it pulls the wheel the opposite way. So from here we're going to tighten the jam nut, which is all there is. That's all you get is a jam nut, which is a very good way of doing it. I have never seen one fail. But from this we're going to tighten this, but we also have to counter and make sure that this one doesn't turn, because if I turn this now, it may or may not grab and twist that. So what I'm going to do is choke up on it with a crescent wrench, and then I'm going to tighten that big jam nut. Okay, and again, this is important. I mean, if it moves ever so slightly, it's going to be all right. Because again, I'm going to have it adjusted, but just so you know, this is how I'm going to do it. But just to cheat, well, you should use a proper wrench. Well, a crescent wrench is the proper wrench for this. It's a backup wrench. It's not the torquing wrench. And then the actual wrench itself that I'm going to use is going right here. Okay, so from that, I'm going to give it a snug. Okay, notice how it's able to pivot. That's what it does when it's in normal operation. Like that. So from here, that jam nut will not go very far because you're jamming it up against something solid, so it's there. Okay, so now that physical connection is established, the tie rod is in place. Let's do a quick once over of our stuff. All right, this is something I like to do because otherwise I wake up late at night. The back one in and torqued. Front one in and torqued. ball joint in location and torqued. Again, I'm not taking the boot and putting it on yet because I might have to, depending on the rack you run into. Sometimes those nice rack teeth that I was able to grab a hold of on this side, they're not on the other side in the same level. So you may have to use this side to be the holding. Whenever I talked about the pinion, you may have to use this side. So I'm not going to button this up yet over here, so I can still come back and grab a rack tooth if I need to. Okay, so just kind of give you the idea of that. Okay, now we have the initial dimension for the other side because we've reestablished the linkage between this and the beginning and where we are now with new components. Again, it's not going to be perfect, but it's close. It's within spitting distance. So now we're going to start the opposite side, and I've given you a pretty good detailed view of this one. We'll come back in if there's anything weird on the other side that we haven't talked about. But as right now, I'm going to put this one down, and I'm going to reestablish the wheel on this one, and then we'll get started on the other side. All right, I'll bring you back when something gets interesting. Well, second side, same as the first. Now, as expected, the tie rod, inner tie rod, doesn't have enough for me to grab a hold of on this side, so I'm waiting on my son-in-law to finish baking a cake, true story, to come and hold something while I twist on this so he can counterbalance it. So anyway, we'll bring you back to that, but other than that, this side, no excitement, nothing drama-wise, just pretty straightforward. Net time to get it apart was 20 minutes once all the tools are laid out and you know kind of what you're going after. Second side was much more straightforward. No surprises, same kind of a hiccup on the brake line, so yeah, it's just time. So we'll get those. They're typically not very expensive, and yeah, it's probably a good time to flush the brake fluid anyway, which seems to be more common in European models than it is in domestics because your brake fluid is hygroscopic, so it draws moisture. So anybody that's had a rusted caliper, internals, or anything like that, that's pretty much something you don't see as much in Europe. They do flush the brake systems as a normal maintenance item. So don't know why, it's just difference. Okay, talk to you soon. Well, as the sun sets in Michigan, kind of finished up with this portion of the repair. We've got the control arms. I showed you this one first. This one had the ball joint worn, kind of loose. If you can shake a ball joint like that, it's pretty much done. Add a couple thousand, or 1,000, 1,500 pounds, 2,000 pounds on it, things get real interesting. Okay. We talked about the bushings look to be okay. Again, this car is a 2000 model, so from that standpoint, it should be okay. This was the passenger side. It likewise wasn't really good. It's just has no load on it whatsoever, so I would say that one was kind of kaput. And there was one side of this one. Yeah, it was that side of the bushing was starting to look a little ratty. It's like, okay, it's not going to do it any good. So there's those. We talked about the inner tie rods, left and right. That's not normal. That's not normal. Not a huge amount, but you did see when we started the amount of play that wheel had from that. The outer tie rods, the one was completely shot. It's still not super loose, but the boot was gone, and it was just going to bring bad things to good people really soon. In the opposite side, you can see that the boot was just getting ready to get cracked, and that's not immediate failure, but I can knock that around in there a little bit. So by the time you start adding the vehicle weight, shock loads, stuff like that, it's best just to get rid of this junk. So from Michigan and from the House of Broken Dobbs things, thank you for tuning in today. It's been a long day. I'm kind of sore. I'm not as young as I used to be. And we'll bring you back when we finish up the oil pan on this one. It had the O-ring seals. I'll show you an example of that in the next video, that it was sucking air through the pickup on the oil pan and causing a low oil light flicker. The thing is, no sound whatsoever. There's no knocking or anything in the engine. However, it's something that I just don't like that for my kids especially. So from Michigan, thank you. Sun's going down, so I'm going in, get that fresh pot of coffee I just looked at, and then start uploading these videos. So thanks again for hanging out. See ya.